Guys, I found it. The greatest behind-the-scenes Star Wars photo ever. George Lucas telling Palpatine how to give his speech. Look at them both holding their arms up. Look at the look on George's face. This is his universe. He built this. He created this world. He has all the power. And he's showing Palpy how to use it.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Not from a Jedi.
This is going to be my new desktop background. I'm just letting you know. I'm just going to put it on my desktop. That's it. Lock it in.
So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause.
So I'm just going back and watching some old interviews George Lucas gave before Revenge of the Sith came out. And there's this one where he's showing footage of General Grievous before the film is even out. This is behind the scenes stuff. The animation on General Grievous, the big deal being that all of this stuff was animated and not real. It's a CGI character, 100%. George was a pioneer in creating CGI characters. But getting to see General Grievous behind the scenes before this film even came out, I know this exact moment in the film. What's the situation, Captain, right? This lucky reporter, man, getting to see all this behind-the-scenes Star Wars stuff as he takes her through. Come on. So I just learned something incredible about George Lucas's filmmaking process. The man is literally still making changes 2 weeks before the films came out. When he was making the prequels, he obviously worked heavily with ILM to create so many digital characters, and because of that, he was able to still edit these 2 weeks before release of the film. It was only 2 weeks before Revenge of the Sith came out that he was like, yep, lock it in, I'm done. That's it. Film is done. 2 weeks. Perhaps this was when he decided to cut out Darth Jar Jar was behind everything. He's like, nah. This must be such a stressful time though. I can't even imagine the anxiety of making last minute changes on a film that's going to exist for eternity and be judged and criticized and loved and everything, and you're still making changes on it 2 weeks before it releases. Need a long holiday after that and a stiff drink. So after filming the Revenge of the Sith fight scenes, Hayden Christensen admitted to having scarred knuckles after the lightsaber fights.
Ewan and I were constantly hitting each other, and I still have scarred knuckles from the reshoots, and so you have to be 100% present at all times when you're doing the fights.
And this is one thing I think a lot of people overlook about lightsabers. They don't have a hand guard. Like, take a sword, for example. Most of them have what's called a hand guard or a cross guard, which is what prevents your opponent's blade from sliding down and slicing open your hand. Lightsabers don't have this. When filming these fight scenes, you have to imagine the amount of times the blade would have slipped down and scarred the actor's hands. Brutal stuff filming the most iconic lightsaber duel in the history of Star Wars. They felt the real pain. Seeing Mustafar in its early stages behind the scene is really something else. I love seeing what these planets initially looked like when they were still being designed. I'm not even talking about concept art. I'm just talking about the CGI, the animation, because Mustafar isn't a real place. It's supposed to be like hell, but this world was entirely created on blue and green screen. Recently, I've been watching a bunch of old interviews done around the time of Revenge of the Sith's release, and they really give you a glimpse into the mind of George Lucas, what he was thinking at the time, and how he had creative control over nearly every decision that went into making his films. He's literally going to the detail of telling the animators where he wants the mouse droid to move across frame.
What I wanted is that guy, this guy, to go across.
This thing lasts like a second and a half at most. It's a mouse droid, George. Why do you care? Hilarious. Did you know that in Revenge of the Sith, most of the green and blue screen scenes and CGI were actually filmed in Australia, right here in Sydney? This includes all of the action sequences on Mustafar, as well as Coruscant, the Jedi Temple, and General Grievous' ship. Why Australia though? Why would they come all the way here to film Star Wars? Well, at the time, the Australian government offered heavy tax breaks to foreign films being filmed in Australia. So it was for money and tax reasons. It was cheaper to get the films made here, even though it's on the complete opposite side of the world. I love the fact that Revenge of the Sith and all of these iconic moments were filmed at Fox Studios in Sydney, which is literally like 10 minutes from where I used to live. Incredible. Did you know that Han Solo was actually going to appear in Revenge of the Sith? At the time, he would have been 10 years old and was supposed to be an orphan somewhere around the Battle of Kashyyyk. And then he would have helped Master Yoda take down General Grievous. I don't know how that was going to work, but all right. Now, I think a lot of this clashed with what was going to happen later on with his personality, with how he was going to evolve as a character. And it was also another of those instances where George Lucas felt this urge to explain everything that came in the original trilogy in the prequels, whereas that didn't really need to happen. Also, they were kind of maybe planning a solo spin-off. I don't know if they were thinking of that back in 2005 when Revenge of the Sith released, but they wanted to leave open the doors for exploring his younger years. Can you imagine if he actually appeared in Revenge of the Sith? That would be so weird. Did you know that in Revenge of the Sith, the volcanic eruptions we see in the background are actually real? When the movie was being made, Mount Etna in Italy was erupting, and so the film crew decided to go there, grab some footage, and then use this to create the backdrop of Mustafar. No wonder it looks so real. I mean, nowadays, especially, they could animate this with CGI, but why do that when you can do the real thing? Obviously, Mustafar was filmed completely on blue screens. It's not like Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor actually went to a volcano and had their lightsaber duel there. But I think it's so authentic they actually filmed a volcanic eruption in real life and used this in the film. So a lot of you know the sound designer Ben Burtt, who created most of the iconic Star Wars sound effects, from Darth Vader's breathing to R2-D2's beeps to the lightsaber sounds. But did you know that in Revenge of the Sith, he was also the voice of every single battle droid, super battle droid, and buzz droid?
You stupid little astro droid.
It's him talking in a funny accent with voice effects. This guy has literally voiced and created more Star Wars characters' sounds, voices than anyone else. Did you know Hayden Christensen gained 24 pounds or 10 kilos to play Anakin Skywalker in Revenge of the Sith? To do this, he had to eat 6 meals a day. I don't know how they do this. It seems super unhealthy, but at the same time, I feel like he did the same thing when he played Anakin again in Obi-Wan. Clearly, he was buffing up for the role and not only eating a lot, but working out every single day. Pumping those weights, man. Totally worth it for what we got in Revenge of the Sith, and also the lightsaber duels in Obi-Wan.
All who gain power are afraid to lose it, even the Jedi.
Palpatine was actually supposed to have more dialogue during Anakin's duel with Count Dooku. Apparently in the original script, he was going to shout things about how Count Dooku convinced the Tusken Raiders to capture Shmi Skywalker, Anakin's mother, and torture her, which would have further fueled Anakin's hatred and desire for revenge. Ultimately, this was cut out of the film, but at the same time, I feel like this could have added so much more context to his turn to the dark side. We know it was because of his mother, because of Padme, he wanted to save her, but at the same time, being able to see that in this duel could have added more motive to the very brutal way in which he slaughters Count Dooku. This is a Star Wars deleted scene I didn't know existed, and we don't actually have any footage of. But according to Ahmed Best, the guy who played Jar Jar, there's a deleted scene where before Palpatine crowned himself the Emperor, he mockingly thanked Jar Jar Binks for granting him the emergency powers that allowed him to take over the galaxy. And thank you, Jar Jar, for granting me the powers to create the first galactic Empire. What do you say, guys? Hopefully one day we'll see this scene. There must be so many Star Wars deleted scenes out there still that have never been released. Hopefully we'll get a drip feed of them over the years, or they'll just release them all on one day at one time. That'd be great. Thank you. Disney Plus, I'm looking at you guys. Make it happen. Did you know that an early concept for General Grievous actually had him depicted as a child, protected by 2 IG-88 bodyguards? Small kid. Kind of looks a bit like Thrawn floating in a chair. And this is supposed to be the deadliest villain in the galaxy, which is part of why George Lucas rejected this idea. He wanted Grievous to look like the deadliest fighter in the galaxy, and the fact that he's a child here means that there would have been some indication he wouldn't have been taken seriously. Also, apparently, the final appearance of General Grievous's face was inspired partly by the shape of a bathroom detergent spray nozzle. Bam, and the dirt is gone. Samuel L. Jackson just made an appearance on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, and Jimmy Fallon challenged him to a lightsaber duel, which wasn't really a duel. It was more like them just dancing around, fighting, swinging the sabers. But more importantly, Samuel L. Jackson also told a story about how when he was filming Revenge of the Sith, he took a practice lightsaber with him on a golf course each time he was playing golf to practice his moves in his duel with Palpatine.
Well, I had my practice lightsaber. Well, it was the lightsaber that I actually used to actually fight in the film.
He also said that during the duel, he had something like 93 to 98 different moves he had to learn. Imagine that, practicing the choreography on a golf course and being Samuel L. Jackson. He also did the whole thing backwards because Palpatine was advancing most of the time. They filmed this entire thing in slow motion as well because Ian McDiarmid couldn't keep up with fast movements, which is fair, and then sped it up for the final film. What you're looking at here is new behind-the-scenes footage of Anakin's duel with Count Dooku. This is Hayden Christensen and Kyle Rowling practicing the first saber duel in Revenge of the Sith, and what I think is so impressive about this is how quickly Hayden actually moves. He actually learned all of his own stunts, performed them. We've seen a lot of the behind-the-scenes footage with him and Obi-Wan, Ewan McGregor, but man, the speed, the intensity, the athleticism, the move where he drops his saber and catches it with his other hand. and then slices off Count Dooku's head. Cheeky smile at the end. I also love that the scene is another perfect example of the sheer violence of the prequels, the amount of deaths, limbs being cut off. The prequels had everything, man. Here's another example of it. Seeing the behind the scenes of that, even more brutal. Did you know that Gary Oldman, who a lot of you probably know from Harry Potter, he played Sirius Black, or from Christopher Nolan's Batman films, playing James Gordon, was actually originally approached to play General Grievous, and it was a part he was going to take if there weren't union issues. Gary Oldman was then supposed to also play a role in the sequels. In The Force Awakens, he was supposed to be Or Senteca, the guy right at the start of the film. However, this role eventually went to Max von Sydow. I feel like General Grievous would have been such a different character had he been voiced by Gary Oldman. Matthew Wood brings such a quirkiness to the character, and I feel like his personality would have been quite different had Gary Oldman decided to take the role.
Back away! I will deal with this Jedi slime myself.
Did you know that General Grievous's cough was actually recorded by the creator himself, George Lucas? Apparently, during the filming of Revenge of the Sith, George Lucas had bronchitis, and he instructed actor Matthew Wood, who plays General Grievous, to give the character a cough. So George Lucas recorded his own cough, and that's the cough you hear in the movies. Now, in the actual Star Wars canon, the CIS, led by Count Dooku, came together to mortally injure General Grievous, and then convert him into a subservient super cyborg. On the brink of death, Grievous was offered the chance of survival by the Sith Lord to become a cyborg, and therefore his cough is caused by his previous injuries. However, I much prefer the 2003 Cartoon Network Clone Wars explanation, where Mace Windu crushed General Grievous' chest using the Force, causing him to develop the iconic cough. This is early test footage of the Anakin vs. Dooku duel from the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. It not only features Dooku getting stabbed in the eye, eventually disarmed, and then getting his head cut off, but also a number of stunts we've never seen before. A lot of these moves can also be recognized in the Revenge of the Sith video game. It's interesting seeing how much inspiration the developers of that game took from early fight scene footage such as this, influencing the lightsaber combat and style given to each of the game's characters. For example, this saber lock and then push is Anakin's grab move in the game. Also, Anakin's iconic block stance can be seen here, with him holding his saber basically upside down across his shoulder. And I think it's also important to appreciate Hayden Christensen's dedication to this role. The amount of training and choreography that would have gone into this would have taken months to develop, let alone having the fitness to do it. Also, barely any of this made it into the final fight. It was condensed down and refined, and it's really only certain moves and the ending that we actually see in the film. This is so ridiculously brutal. An early version of Anakin's fight with Obi-Wan shows Anakin strangling Padme in a way that is way more brutal than what made it into the actual film. Not only does he choke her using the Force, but with his back to her lifts Padme up against a wall and then drops her to the floor, all moments before launching into his duel with Obi-Wan. I can understand why this didn't make it into the final version of the film, being way too dark, and going against the fact that on some level Anakin still loves Padme in this scene, but man is this brutal. This is an early test of the stuntmen performing Palpatine's fight with Mace Windu, which clearly shows the differing lightsaber styles, how aggressive Palpatine is, how swiftly he takes down the other Jedi, and that he was clearly overpowering Mace Windu throughout almost the entire fight. You really get a sense that Palpatine had a unique lightsaber style, going in with a lot of stab moves and also keeping the blade quite close to his body. He also appears to move with extreme ease, and I love that they even incorporated some of the spinning effects. There are elements of this scene that you can still see in the final version of the fight, which was filmed much closer up and actually sped up, as Samuel L. Jackson and Ian McDiarmid didn't perform the fight at this speed. It's actually really interesting seeing moments of this scene shot from a wider angle, so we get much more of a sense of the lightsaber style and ferocity of the combat. And I love that the stuntmen even acted out Palpatine against the window using the Force lightning. So good. Did you know that in the original choreographed fight of Anakin's duel with Count Dooku at the start of Revenge of the Sith, Anakin was supposed to blind Dooku in one eye using his lightsaber? This duel arguably has one of the darkest endings of all Star Wars duels in all of the films, with Anakin taking both lightsabers and then listening to Palpatine.
Do it.
So it's interesting to see that the original version of this duel was even darker and even more brutal. At one point, Anakin also kicks Dooku in the face, which was included, I believe, in the final fight. There are some lightsaber moves Anakin uses here that I think were taken out of this duel and then used instead in his duel against Obi-Wan. Did you know that in one of the original endings for Revenge of the Sith, Padme was going to try and kill Anakin by slicing his throat with a knife? In 2016, there was an interview with Ian McCaig, a concept artist and character designer. He's actually the guy who designed Darth Maul, who revealed that in an early version of Revenge of the Sith, Padme was plotting with the Separatists behind Anakin's back to form what eventually became the rebellion. When arriving on Mustafar, she runs over to Anakin and gives him a hug, but in her hand is a knife. While hugging Anakin, she's got the knife to Anakin's neck and is about to kill him, but she can't do it. She loves him too much, even though she can see he's becoming a monster. Can you imagine if we actually got this version of Revenge of the Sith? It's even darker than the original. Have you ever noticed that Obi-Wan is responsible for like 90% of the fake limbs in Star Wars? The amount of arms and legs this guy has cut off. It all started with cutting Darth Maul in half, removing his legs. He cuts off Savage Opress's arm. This one I completely forgot about. Don't even get me started on what he does with Anakin. There's Ponda Bubba in the Cantina Bar in A New Hope. I guess you could say the Acklay counts, seeing as though he is removing its limbs. And I feel like I'm definitely missing something.
Anymore.
Did you know that Samuel L. Jackson was pleased Mace Windu wasn't killed in his sleep or killed by a clone? He wanted to be given somewhat of a gracious death, and in his final duel with Palpatine, Mace Windu showed his strength and even won the duel, depending on what you believe. Some people thought Palpatine let him win, so Anakin would walk in on them and then turn to the dark side, but I guess you could technically say Mace Windu did win this duel.
You know, I go out the way I do. I've been begging not to die in my sleep or get stabbed in the back by some clone, and it didn't happen. So I'm happy.
Did you know that Obi-Wan was actually going to fight the MagnaGuards before he faces General Grievous on Utapau in Revenge of the Sith? There's actually an entire choreographed sequence of Ewan McGregor fighting the MagnaGuards, which I'm assuming George decided to delete from the film, knowing that Obi-Wan had to save his strength to fight Grievous, and that he'd also faced these guys before and wanted to deal with them much simpler this time around. I think this also explains why Obi-Wan's hair is a bit of a mess before he drops this giant thing on top of them. Clearly, this sequence was supposed to be part of the original scene and was just cut during the editing process.
Back away! I will deal with this Jedi slime myself.
Your move.
Do you guys believe the theory that Palpatine is 500 times faster than anyone else when using a lightsaber? This is something Ian McDiarmid said himself.
But I didn't know he could use a lightsaber. And twice as fast. In fact, no, 500 times as fast as anyone else.
Which would potentially explain how he took out 3 of the 4 Jedi that confronted him almost immediately. But for his duel with Mace Windu to make any sense, it would mean that we are watching a slowed down version of what is actually going on. This is never really implied in Star Wars at any point. At no point do we see characters moving faster than what seems reasonable. So I'm not sure if this is something Ian McDiarmid just decided to say and make up kind of on the spot, or if something George Lucas mentioned to him at some point during directing, or if it's actually the canon truth. Did you know there's an actual reason why General Grievous loses 2 of his hands early on in his duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi on Utapau? Apparently, because of General Grievous's 4 arms and 4 lightsabers, it was incredibly challenging to film, with 2 separate stunt performers wielding 2 of Grievous's sabers in 2 separate takes. These takes were then combined together in post-production, but to make things easier, they decided to have 2 of Grievous's hands cut off early in the fight so that it became much easier to film and more of a standard duel.
Attack, Kenobi.
I'm joking! Stop! 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 Stop the brake! Stop!
Did you know in Revenge of the Sith, there's an actual reason why they chose to include the high ground scene? Apparently, Nick Gillard, the stunt coordinator, wrote this scene based on where he and Hayden lived during their time in Australia when filming. Apparently, he and Hayden lived next to each other, and each night they'd walk up to a nearby restaurant. Apparently, to get to this restaurant was uphill, and Hayden always hated walking uphill. So, because Hayden complained of this, Nick Gillard thought Obi-Wan could have the advantage over Anakin if he had the high ground.
He hates walking on a slope. So that was in my mind, that if I can get him on the slope, Obi might have a chance.
Did you know that Anakin and Obi-Wan's duel in Revenge of the Sith actually had an alternate ending? Towards the end of the duel, Anakin held Obi-Wan by the throat using the Force, and he said,
"I'm sorry it has to be this way, my master.
And as Anakin went for the final blow, Obi-Wan turned off his lightsaber, spun around, turned it back on, therefore striking down Anakin.
And in that move, Obi sucked his lightsaber, but in the suck, it went through his arms.
Apparently, they fought really hard to keep this version in the film, but at the end of the day, it was George Lucas's film, and he wanted to take the way of the high ground. I'm sure you've seen the deleted scene of Yoda arriving on Dagobah in Revenge of the Sith after Order 66. But what you might not know is why it was actually cut from the film. In the DVD commentary for Revenge of the Sith, producer Rick McCallum said that George didn't want that scene to disconnect the audience from following the Skywalker children's fate as they go their separate ways. The comic of Revenge of the Sith, however, places the scene between Vader's awakening and the Emperor's supervising the construction of the Death Star, completely replacing Padme's funeral. And I think this is why George didn't want to include it, feeling it would have broken up this entire sequence too much, and the film at the end of the day isn't about Yoda. Yoda can disappear into the galaxy and be more of a mystery. Did you know that in the comic book version of Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, there's actually a much larger, longer discussion between Anakin and Palpatine when Palpatine reveals that he is Sith Lord, the Sith Lord behind everything. Palpatine asks Anakin if he's even willing to kill the Chancellor and plunge the galaxy into an even bigger conflict because there'll be no one to lead and rule. And this actually seems to change Anakin's motivation to join the dark side, and I think really shows just how deep Palpatine's manipulation tactics go. He's really trying to make Anakin see the bigger picture, see that this needs to happen, that Order 66 needs to happen, and that Anakin needs to turn to the dark side for more reasons than just saving Padme. Did you know in Revenge of the Sith's comic adaptation, before Obi-Wan leaves for Utapau to fight General Grievous, he actually stops by Padme's place to talk to her. And this scene was actually shot for the film, although the deleted scene hasn't been fully released. And this is also why Anakin suspects Padme is having an affair with Obi-Wan, and why Anakin asks Padme if Obi-Wan has been here. It also confirms that Obi-Wan knew about Padme and Anakin's marriage before he questions Padme about Anakin being the father of her baby later in the film. And he promises not to tell the Jedi Council. In my opinion, had they left this scene in, it would have made Anakin's fall to the dark side even sadder. Because Obi-Wan is willing to go to the lengths to protect his friend, his Padawan, even though he knows he's living a double life. Did you know that the novelization of Revenge of the Sith actually offered an excruciating insight into how Anakin lived through his spiritual and physical transition into Darth Vader after being burned on the river of Mustafar? It opens with, "This is how it feels to be Anakin Skywalker, forever. The first dawn of light in your universe brings you pain. The light burns you. It will always burn you." It goes on to, "Part of you will always lie upon black glass sand beside a lake of fire while flames chew upon your flesh. You don't even have lungs anymore." It even talks about killing Padme. You killed her. You killed her because finally, when you could have saved her, when you could have gone away with her, when you could have been thinking about her, you were thinking about yourself. It is in this blazing moment that you finally understand the trap of the dark side, the final cruelty of the Sith. Because now, yourself is all you will ever have. So dark, man. I'm scared. I love this deleted scene so much, and I honestly wish it was still included in Revenge of the Sith. With the original idea of Obi-Wan and Yoda arriving at the Jedi Temple after Order 66, the two Jedi were going to be met by a bunch of clones wearing Jedi robes, trying to disguise themselves as Jedi to kill any other incoming Jedi. This scene was deleted well before it was even close to being completed, but I kind of just love the idea of Temuera Morrison playing multiple Jedi clone troopers, and then also being sliced to pieces by Yoda and Obi-Wan. But this scene was actually reworked into the final film. However, instead of the clones wearing Jedi robes, they're just dressed in their normal clone trooper armor. Did you know that C-3PO is the first character to talk in A New Hope and the last character to talk in Revenge of the Sith? Meaning that he gets the first and last line of dialogue in George Lucas's Star Wars. Not only that, the dialogue spoken takes place in the same hallway of the Tantive 4. In A New Hope, C-3PO says, "Did you hear that?" And in Revenge of the Sith, he says,
"What? Oh no."
I love that George rounded off his Star Wars films with this, with one of his original characters at either side of the trilogies, bookending the Star Wars films he created. And in the great words of George Lucas, you could say,
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
hopefully it'll work.
Did you know that this shot of Anakin crying in Revenge of the Sith is actually a reference to a painting from the year 1847, which depicts Satan's fall from heaven? The painting is titled The Fallen Angel, and is from French artist Alexandre Cabanel, and was created when the artist was only 24 years old. And I think credit needs to not only be given to George Lucas for taking this opportunity to make such a reference, but also to David Tattersall, who was the cinematographer on Revenge of the Sith. The painting was actually inspired by John Milton's poem Paradise Lost, the first version published in 1667. And I feel like this is such a George Lucas thing to do, paying homage to other art forms in his work. Did you know that Boba Fett was originally supposed to appear in Revenge of the Sith? This concept art here shows Boba Fett killing Mace Windu, taking revenge on the Jedi for killing his father Jango Fett. The idea was eventually scrapped, with George feeling Boba didn't really have a place in Episode 3, but was later reworked for the Clone Wars, where a young Boba attempts to kill Mace Windu but fails. It would have been pretty cool to see Boba appear in Revenge of the Sith, leading the clones into Order 66 with Anakin, but it really doesn't make much sense for the overall story and would be more of a subplot. Did you know that Han Solo was originally going to appear in Revenge of the Sith? Han Solo was going to have a small part as a young boy on Kashyyyk, being raised by Chewbacca. Apparently he was also going to be made a bit of a slob and was going to play a major part in finding General Grievous, being scripted to find a transmitter droid that would trace back to General Grievous on Utapau. There's even some written dialogue of this where he talks to Master Yoda. He says, "I found part of a transmitter droid near the East Bay. I think it's still sending and receiving signals." And Yoda says, "Good, good. Track this we can back to the source. Find General Grievous, we might." I think almost everyone is glad this didn't make it into the movie, with George Lucas seemingly always constantly trying to tie all of his characters together. It would have seemed like overkill, unnecessary, and would have also likely meant we never got the Solo movie, considering part of the character's backstory would have been explained in Revenge of the Sith. In this deleted scene from Revenge of the Sith, Mace Windu suggests that Chancellor Palpatine should be arrested after the destruction of General Grievous. It's strange that this scene originally took place earlier in the film, before Obi-Wan had left for Utapau to search for General Grievous. And I think it was the right idea to rework this into a later part of the film. However, in the original, I like that Obi-Wan's involved, and I like that he seems surprised at the idea of arresting Palpatine.
Arrested?
Other dialogue from the scene is quite similar in both versions, with Yoda saying these ideas will lead to a dark place.
To a dark place this line of thought will carry us.
And this scene was also shown from a different perspective in the Clone Wars.
I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi.
I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi.
Did you know that in the original script for Count Dooku's duel with Anakin in Revenge of the Sith actually had Palpatine say more dialogue, which included revealing that Dooku paid the Tusken Raiders to kidnap, torture, and kill Shmi, Anakin's mother. And this would have aided Anakin's turn to the dark side, further assisting Palpatine's manipulation, and convincing Anakin to go against the Jedi way and kill Count Dooku. As far as I know, this isn't included in any other media. It was just an idea that was cut in an earlier script. But this kind of backstory would have been interesting, fueling Anakin's rage and hatred, but in some ways doesn't really make sense, as I'm not sure the Tuskens actually accept any kind of payment because of their cultural beliefs. It's crazy hearing how George Lucas chose to direct this scene from Revenge of the Sith. The scene Mace Windu goes flying out the window. The scene where Palpatine says, or screams rather, In a recent interview, Ian McDiarmid gave some insight into George's direction for this scene. He said, "George Lucas kept hyping me up on that. I was screaming, absolute power." And then he asked George, "Do you want me to do some quiet ones? Because this is a bit much." And George was like, "No, go further, go further." Remember, George gave the infamous lines, faster, more intense?
George really wouldn't say anything. He would, at the beginning, he would say faster or more intense.
And so Ian McDiarmid did, and George seems to have kept most of it. There's no holding back there. I really appreciate that Hayden Christensen has confirmed there were no stunt doubles used in his duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi in Revenge of the Sith. He also confirmed that the footage wasn't sped up, and yes, they were just that good. Hayden and Ewan McGregor, of course, spent months practicing for this duel to make sure they were the ones who could do it.
This is true. That was us. There were no stunt doubles, and they didn't speed it up at all. We were just that good.
I can't believe that in the prequels, Hayden Christensen wasn't originally going to be in the Darth Vader suit. This was something he actually requested from George Lucas.
When we were doing Revenge of the Sith, I found out that they were not planning on having me be in the Darth Vader suit.
So he personally went to George Lucas asking for a suit to be made and if he could be the one in the suit. It's hard to picture the prequels without Hayden in the suit because I feel like this is the defining ending to the prequels, to that trilogy. Seeing Hayden don the Darth Vader armor and making the transformation from Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader. It's so much more powerful knowing that it was actually Hayden in the suit.